Let's be honest, when most players think about what makes a professional AD carry great, no one is thinking about their macro, their CS, or their rotations. Yeah, right. There's only one thing that matters to be considered a great ADC, and that's a mechanical outplaying. Doing big damage in a team fight while dodging every skill shot, maybe even a little space gliding action. That's obviously what carrying as an ADC is all about. And Ruler is definitely a mechanical monster. With Ezreal back in the meta lately, we are being blessed with some crazy team fighting by one of the best Ezreals ever. Ruler does not miss a single skill shot, and he understands his damage thresholds perfectly. Like when he E forwards towards Ashe, he autos, and then he's already casting his Q to the next target, knowing that was going to finish her off. Then he smoothly cleans up the rest of the fight. He's absolutely cracked on Ezreal, but it's not his flashy mechanics that makes Ruler so special. What truly makes him shine is his ability to use the limitless resource available to everyone, including you and me, your movement. It's the simplest mechanical outplay of all, just some clicks on the ground that even your grandpa could pull off. We're going to show and teach you the genius positioning that Ruler has in his LPL matches, which lets him single-handedly carry multiple games. By the end, you're going to realize it's not his mechanics that makes Ruler so dominant. It's just the simple mastery of knowing how to move his character to the right place at the right time that any of you can immediately learn from. To really appreciate how Ruler can win a fight with just a couple of clicks, let's first discuss one of the critical marksman teamfighting concepts most players don't fully understand. A lot of ADC players tend to believe they need to let their tanks initiate fights, and their job is to sit back and wait for things to happen. As a result, you'll usually see them towards the back when a teamfight is brewing. That's not actually what you should be doing though. If you hadn't noticed yet, ADCs in professional games are almost always positioned towards the front, either side by side or even ahead of their frontline allies when posturing before a fight. Why? Well, for starters, you're a ranged champion. You want to actually use your range to try and look for poke, or even just try fighting for control over an area. Melee champions can't do this, so it's usually the ADC's or a mage's responsibility to try and achieve these goals. You may be concerned about just being engaged on trying to do so. It can be risky, but that's precisely what you want though. Try to keep in mind that most engaged champions only have one, maybe two mobility spells to try and reach you. Malphite with his ultimate, Nocturne R, Lyssandra's Claw, and so on. Think about it like this. If they use their one mobility spell to try and get on top of you, and you use a spell or flash to kite back, you'd now be in a relatively safe spot. Meanwhile, the enemy player engaging on you is stuck with no mobility in the middle of your team. Everyone can now focus fire them. Meanwhile, the other four enemy members will be trying to play catch up to their engager, who went in way too deep. Here's a great example of this concept in action. JDG is setting up to fight over Dragon, and look at Ruler standing in front like we talked about. They see Alistar over the wall, so they send Kanavi on Lilia to force him away. Alistar gets a little tricky here. He pretends that he's afraid and disengaging away, and this makes Ruler drop his guard a bit. Then Alistar flash combos to start the fight. Pay very close attention to everyone else on EDG right now. Look at how all their champion models at the same time turn to follow up. You cannot leave your engager to die. Look at the positioning. Alistar can be focused fired by most players on JDG. Meanwhile, EDG has no one they can hit. They have to do something or Alistar will die for free. This makes their actions very predictable. Now Ruler just uses his spells to reposition to safety, and look at Lilia and Skarner. EDG's champions must move forward, so it's obvious how they're going to play the fight. It's really easy to counter their engage, and this fight was over literally the second it began. We know what it's like to play ADC. It feels like everyone is watching you like a hawk. If you misposition even slightly, 5 players are immediately on top of you and you die instantly. But it's funny how that can actually be one of your biggest strengths for carrying games. Getting a good engage off is really hard. If the person initiating the fight chooses a bad time to go in, their entire team could die instantly. Alistar even outplayed Ruler here. Ruler should have reacted to that engage. He let his guard down at a bad time, and that could have resulted in his death, but he didn't need mechanics or reaction time to win this fight. You should use your opponent's bloodthirstiness to kill ADCs against them. By positioning forward, you make yourself seem like an easy target to go on, and that can potentially bait more and more bad engages from your opponents like the one we just saw. Now, you might think that you need to be a mobile ADC like Ezreal to pull this off. Not really. You just need to feel safe enough to do so. Having your flash up is obviously a great defensive tool, but you can also play around how scary the enemy team's engage actually is. Like this particular game versus BLG, Ruler and the rest of JDG are not faring too well. They're definitely on the back foot and are getting outscaled hard. But BLG only has one reliable engage tool with Ornn ultimate, while Ruler's flash is up. So he's confident in playing far forward like we've seen before. Because he's playing so far up, BLG calls to engage and Ornn casts his ultimate. Ruler dodges the slow first, and here's a subtle but important detail. If he wanted to build as much distance as possible between him and threats, he would begin moving this way. But instead, he keeps kiting the same way and doesn't even flash Ornn's ultimate. Why? Pay attention to the positioning. positioning. Ruler went to this spot right between Corki and Rumble. Meanwhile, the main threats at the moment are Brand and Tristana. Do you see why this is perfect positioning? If they walk up towards Ruler at this angle, they'd be pincering themselves. By Ruler not flashing, they get baited a bit and start walking forward. But look, they both realize at the exact same time they're trolling and turn around. It's too late though. That slight misposition lets Corki and Rumble engage on them hard, and they're too far forward to get away. With the two main threats down, the rest of BLG is cleaned up and JDG goes on to win the game. And it's all off the back of Ruler positioning forward at first, and then repositioning with literally a couple of clicks. No space gliding needed. Alright, now that you understand this concept, and you can see how simple actions can hard carry games, let's show you an absolutely absurd teamfight from Ruler. We've never seen anything like it, and it genuinely blew our minds. As Ruler on Ashe is trying to push in mid lane, we can see a fight beginning to brew between JDG and AL. Moving in to help, he makes sure to space out Leona first so she can't engage on him. Once she E's Braum, he can move forward. And Miss Fortune follows that up with her ultimate. Now, put yourself in Ruler's shoes. What would most Ashes do right now? Professional or casual player, there's an obvious play here. What is it? Most players would probably use their ultimate to stop MF's cast, right? But here's where Ruler really shows his brilliance. That play doesn't actually do much. MF would cleanse, and then they may trade like 2 or 3 auto attacks on each other. Neither side is super favored, so they probably disengage and reassess the fight from there. Top players like Ruler are never satisfied with mediocrity, which is exactly what that play would be. So he does something ridiculous instead. He just willfully walks into the MF ult and keeps hitting Leona. That may seem crazy at first, but does this remind you of anything? He's frontline on Ashe versus quite a few short-range engaged champions. It's the exact same concept as before. If anyone on AL tries to move in and attack Ruler here, he can just flash back, and then JDG would easily kill whoever walked up. Not only that, but he's also got great access to hit whoever he wants. This is the dream scenario of every AD carry. No one can engage on you, while you can output max DPS. He keeps hitting Leona while spacing out Miss Fortune's auto attacks. Then, when she overcommits to reach him, Ruler turns his attention on MF. He begins proccing Braum's passive, but keep in mind she has cleanse. Typically, you'd layer your arrow after Braum's stun, but Ruler casts it instantly, knowing she would use it. We can't say if they coordinated this, but because he did that, MF can't flash Braum's ultimate. Miss Fortune goes down, and the fight is quickly over from there. That was amazing positional awareness by Ruler, which you rarely get to see. But how would you ever know to play a fight this way? It's not like he's ever walked into a Miss Fortune ultimate like that before. How did he just realize that in the middle of a chaotic fight and walk into such a good position so confidently? Well, that brings us to our special skill-capped tip. Keep in mind that teamfights dramatically change based on the length of a game. Early on, players require either multiple rotations of spells or auto attacks to finish off one target. Because damage is much lower early in the game, champions tend to die a lot slower. On the other hand, you get blown up later into the game. You will die in 2 or 3 auto attacks from an ADC or off a single rotation from a mage. Tanks follow a similar pattern. At 1 to 2 items, they feel impossible to take down. But later on into the game, they're usually really squishy relative to the damage being dished out. Most players don't deliberately play around this. There are a couple of simple guidelines you can follow to play fights out way more consistently. Later on into the game, you should care a lot about small mistakes. If you miss position slightly, you will die in half a second. But it goes both ways. You don't need to output constant DPS later into the game. You only need 2 or 3 good auto attacks or spells to instantly kill someone, so it's okay to play more patient and look for good opportunities. If you recall, that's what happened in that earlier fight we analyzed. Branded Tristana made a super tiny mistake and got blown up instantly for it. Earlier into the game though, you should care way more about getting max value out of your kit. You want to get as many auto attacks and rotations of spells as possible. This is why Ruler didn't initially arrow here. Getting someone's cleanse is not a valuable use of your ultimate most of the time. Likewise, that's why he really valued standing here, even if it meant tanking MF's ult. You'd never do this versus a level 16 MF, but at this point in the game, the damage isn't that crazy. And from this spot, he'll be able to dish out a lot of auto attacks since he has so many targets to easily reach. And that's why he valued this position so much, because it plays into your early teamfighting goals. In any case, as you can see, it's not the super flashy moments that are allowing Ruler to carry so consistently. It's the basic movement commands that are done at just the right time into the right spot that are really turning these fights in his favor. And by the way, this doesn't just apply to positioning properly in team fights. Your movement is applicable in so many different ways. A key skill that many players neglect to work on is being aware of what your opponents are likely thinking about how your champion is moving. You can feed disinformation and even control control your opponent's actions this way. For example, you guys have all gone against someone who has been passive the whole laning phase, refusing to ever fight you. Then they randomly get confident and start walking towards you. It's obvious you're being ganked, right? Always think about how you're moving and what information that might be giving to your enemy. For example, let's say you have a ward in one of the mid lane side brushes. As you walk up to push mid lane, an assassin walks in. You push the wave, and then you decide you want to kill them. You walk straight towards them, but this puts them on guard. They'll know you have vision, and you'll miss your kill window. Instead, put yourself in their shoes. What would you like to see yourself do if you were them? For example, you could walk back a little, pretending you're trying to be safe, but begin channeling your recall close to the brush. That's every assassin's dream, because they think you're unaware. They'll run at you in a straight line, making your counter much easier to pull off. The more you think about the game through your opponent's point of view, the more often you can outplay them with just a couple of clicks. And now, we'll show you a brilliant example of how it's done with Ruler on Jhin versus Elk's Ezreal. At the moment, both teams are looking to contest the Void Grubs. Because of that, Elk tries to crash the wave quickly and rotate over. Then Ruler clears the wave to follow. Okay, to understand what's about to happen, there's an important detail you need to know. Right now, Ruler has rushed Swiftness boots. Against an Ezreal, this is a lot of power in a 1v1 situation, since you can very reliably dodge his spells. Elk knows this, so he's going to do something tricky. Because you can never land Ezreal ult versus a good player who has Swifties, he's going to pretend to focus on the grub fight and use his ultimate there. This is super similar to the example we just covered. Elk is pretending he's unaware of Ruler behind him, but Ruler knows he's against a good player, so he plays along. He keeps running in a straight line towards Elk, pretending that he's falling for the bait. And the second the cast is over, he immediately jukes, dodging the Q. Watch what happens next. Ruler keeps chasing for the kill as Elk goes into the brush. Then he easily sidesteps the spells and keeps chasing. Is he just insane and dodged the spells with pure reaction? Well, let's take a look again. Ruler outplayed Elk by mind gaming with two important skill shot concepts. First, whenever a skill shot champion walks into a brush, you should immediately have your guard up. Because you can't see the wind up animation of your opponent casting the spell, you have such little time to react that it's really difficult to dodge spells coming from the brush. Therefore, Ruler broke a fundamental here. Right now, he should be weaving to dodge spells, but only Ezreal's W is up, which he's not worried about dodging because of something you'd only know if you mained Ezreal and or Jhin. At this moment, it is safe to assume that if they fight to the death, Ruler is favored. Ezreal only wins if he lands every Q and W, otherwise he loses, and that's very hard to do versus Jhin with Swifties. Which brings us to our second concept Ruler is using here. There are times where you're playing a skill shot champion that an enemy player will run at you in a straight line. This typically indicates that they don't care about what spells you land. Even if you hit everything, they're going to kill you anyways, so running in a straight line is their best play. Hopefully, you can see the genius at work here. At first, Elk was running because there's no way he can fight Jhin. It's too hard to reliably land his spells. But when Ruler runs at him in a straight line, Elk thinks he's getting cocky. Ruler must think he wins even if he doesn't dodge anything. So, Elk sees a kill opportunity. And that brings us to the final moment of this play. Look at him. Without vision, he began juking again the second Elk turned to fight. How did Ruler know? It's simple. It goes back to the start of the play. The initial Q he juked set this all up. He ran at Elk in a straight line, perfectly calculating when Ezreal Q would be back up. The second it's up, he immediately starts juking, knowing Elk would likely turn at that moment. Now Elk has overcommitted and he desperately tries to get away. Ruler waits until he's next to a wall, making it much easier to land his W, and then lines up his ultimate, forcing Elk to flash back into the jungle. Despite having some of the best mechanics in the world, that is not what Ruler usually relies on to hard carry tons of games against some of the most mechanically impressive players out there. A ton of his outplays boil down to basic fundamental concepts and executing them with a few good clicks that anyone can pull off with some practice. Keep cheering for Ruler and start paying close attention in his games, and you will quickly see many more examples of everything we discussed here today. As always, thanks for watching.